Hello again. I'm doing another tier video. Uh, as I've said before, I do like to put these out every now and then, just to give you something in the meantime, because I appreciate my main videos do take a lot of time to get out. So yeah, this is just something I put out just so I can talk about things I might not be making videos on. One of the things I've mentioned before with these is that it's less about ranking and more just about giving me the opportunity to talk about characters and storylines and soaps that I might not really spend too much time focusing on otherwise. um so yeah, I guess a bit of a progress update. I'm working on my next video. I'm doing the video editing for it, which is the less strenuous part, really. So I don't anticipate it taking too long to get out. I think at this stage we're looking mid to late July, I think. So not that long. Don't hold me to that because I don't know what might happen, but I'm gonna keep chugging away at it, and we'll see how that pans out. But I'm very excited about it. I'm very pleased with it so far. It's a fascinating topic and really interesting video, and I'm really happy with what I've done so far. So yeah, so this time we're looking at EastEnders characters. Last time we did Coronation Street ones. This time we're doing EastEnders. So, like last time, I've taken 25 characters from around um, the history of the soap. Not a massively varied spread, I don't think. It wasn't really last time, but I've got a good variety here anyway. I think. So yeah. So first off, we have Uncle Charlie Slater, the poor guy who was stuck in a house with all those Slater women in the early 2000s and sort of struggling under the weight of having to manage all of them and dealing with all their sort of difficult lives and Big Mo not exactly helping out. Um, so Charlie Slater is sort of one of those characters that's sort of interesting in soap because he is maybe the archetypal put upon man. He's very much in that spread. There's something sort of Arthur Fowler about him. Just sort of, I guess, masculinity under siege, maybe would be a decent reading of him. Um, yeah, I think he's sort of a necessary part of that family makeup, really, because you sort of need the figure in there who's the put upon voice of reason. Trying to manage all the difficulties from like whatever Cat gets up to, and um, Zoe's stuff, and Big Mo's constant scheming, and Little Mo's abusive relationships, and all this stuff, and he's sort of slap bang in the middle, desperately trying to bring some sense of order, but never quite managing it. And I think, for my money, the best Charlie Slater stuff comes with Cat, regarding her rape at the hands of his brother. I think we'll get on to Kat because she is in this mix, but I think the stuff about how their relationship changed after she became pregnant is really interesting and kind of brave because he does sort of openly, begrudgingly, I suppose, admit that he did see her differently after that, and it was sort of difficult for him to be as affectionate with her as he was before, which I think is really brave because a lot of the time stories like that ignore that potential. They sort of families come together in the face of adversity, but Charlie, very in a very human way, he was affected by it, and I think that's interesting. And I think soaps do interesting things more than they are given credit for. So yeah, I like him well enough. There's not a massive amount to say about him, so he's sort of very mixed, very solid for me. Um, the next one is Christian Clark. Now this is going back to when I really watched EastEnders quite frequently. Um, his storyline with Saeed was huge at the time, still is. I mean, people are still talking about that. It really made an impact with the right people at the right age. I think I still see that popping up. There's so many fan videos on YouTube. Um, and yeah, it was a big storyline for me. I remember watching that play out, and it was great. I think one of the things years later that I look back on, having now sort of knowing a bit more about EastEnders and its history, is comparing Christian with Colin and Barry. Colin was the first gay character in EastEnders, and one of the interesting things about that is the first gay kiss was just a peck on the cheek between Colin and his boyfriend, and people lost their minds over it. I mean, the British tabloid press really ripped into EastEnders over that. It was huge. I mean, people were, screaming, "Get that filth off our screens" and all sorts. And it was a huge controversy and a massive deal. And I sort of, now that I'm older, I sort of look back on Christian and think he's sort of, Christian is a reaction to the reaction Colin got, I think. It's EastEnders really pushing the boat out in a way it never could before, never would before, because Christian, in contrast to Colin, is completely at ease with himself, completely embracing who he is, loud, proud, very much rejoicing in who he is and unashamed. Um, and I think that I kind of view Christian as a middle finger to those critics who had so much problem with Colin, um, because this is the sort of character. I mean, if they went nuts over that little peg on the cheek, I think Christian would have killed them. Seeing that, um, and it's sort of interesting looking back because he is sort of the time in his way. There's a lot of, I mean, I remember when metrosexuality was a thing, which is not something we really talk about anymore, which basically just amounted to men taking care of their appearance, which was interesting that was so noteworthy that it was a thing. And Christian is very much of that breed of new masculinity. One of the things that sort of sticks out about him is that he is, he's athletic, he's well built, he's a personal trainer, and there's a sort of short theme of Ian Beale feeling very threatened by Christian and his masculinity in this really interesting way, when Christian first moves into the Beale household, because he's uncomfortable with the fact that he's gay and with homosexuality in general. He's sort of uneasy around that, but it's also mixed with the idea that Christian is more masculine than Ian Beale is by a long shot. So you've got these weird, what once would have been opposite ends of the spectrum. These two colliding ideas in Christian that Ian Beale sort of can't really wrap his head around, and there's a lot of feelings there, which I think is really interesting. And I will be making a video, I'm sure, one day about Christian and Saeed. But it's just about approach. I don't know whether to do it on its own or whether to combine it with a storyline that Coronation Street did with Todd, and his coming to terms with his sexuality, or maybe make it even bigger and just make it about gay characters in soap in general. It's something that I need to think about a bit more. But I think there's a lot to talk about with Christian because I think he's interesting in and of himself, and also in the wider story of what EastEnders is. So he's a little higher for me. So now we come to, I'm going to do Den and Angie together because you sort of really can't do them separately. I don't think there's ever been, I don't know, they were the first big stars of EastEnders. I think you can argue that maybe the Mitchells probably did take over from them. I don't think people are more inclined to talk about Peggy than they are about Angie these days. And I think Dirty Den has sort of become more of a mythical, legendary figure than a character in and of himself, which is it's interesting. When I made a video about Den and Leslie Grantham's return to EastEnders in the early noughties, And I think one of the things that stands out to me is that, as I say, people sort of misinterpret the character. It was interesting watching that documentary that was made in the lead up to his return. One of the talking heads on it, I think it was Paul Ross, said that Den should have gone out in a hail of bullets, like a complete, Scarface type. That's not who Den is at all. Den is not. He's not a fighter. He's a guy who's going to chance his arm. He's cunning more than anything. I mean, Leslie Grantham himself said, and I used the clip in the video, that he will he will chance his arm and test a person and see how far he can go. And if the guy buckles, he's got him. But if he faces any resistance, he'll sort of back off. Um, and I think it's telling that people misunderstand the character like that because it shows the success of the character in a weird way. He's become bigger than just a character in a soap. He's become, as I say, like a very much a soap icon. Um, I think Dennis he's the sort of person who you'd want in your community, I think, but you'd never really warm to him. He sort of likes to fancy himself as the guy who gets things done, the guy you go to if you need something. But he's not a particularly pleasant character, really. He cheats on his wife. He only really loves. I think there was only really two people in Den's life that he loved, himself and Sharon. And I think it's very telling that he refers to her as princess because by extension that makes him king, which I think is really interesting. Um, I think I I know the revived Den, so to speak, when he returns. I know that sort of gets a lot of stick, but I think there's a lot of interesting stuff going on in that storyline. I can absolutely see like why Leslie Grantham returned, and I do sort of wish he'd hung around because it would have been really interesting to see him interact with Grant and Peggy. I know I'm not the first person to make that point, and I won't be the last. Um, but certainly his original run was just he and Angie, just a great couple of characters, and easily, if you go back and watch those old episodes, they're the standouts far and away. Um, that relationship just long past the point of death, just going through the motions. Really, two people who in some ways live to piss each other off. You can tell there's a lot of resentment there, but you can also tell that there was some affection, and you can sort of see why they were together in the first place. It's a very interesting snapshot of a relationship that is dead, long past dead, um, and great chemistry between those two actors as well. I mean, that episode where um, Angie lies and says she's only got 6 months to live. That's. I mean, it's a two-hander aside from the window cleaner, and it's great watching them play off each other. You can tell these are two actors who really know one another's rhythms in the performances. Um, so yeah, Den is definitely top tier for me, and Angie as well. Um, I think Den probably gets a lot of the attention, but Angie's an interesting character in her own right. She's a great tragic figure, really, because there's talk. I think I put it in the Sharon Gate video that essentially Angie idolized Den and wanted him to be this sort of knight in shining armor, and he never really was, but she never stopped hoping. And there's something deeply tragic about that. Um, these two people sort of stuck together, and you can see why they lasted this long, but at the same time, just Den never really cared about Angie too much. I don't think he cared about her enough, and she meant something to him. But when it comes down to it, the only two people in Den's life that mean anything to him are himself and Sharon. And Anita Dobson's great as well, and obviously the the divorce papers scene. I mean, is that the most iconic moment in all of British soap? I think it is, probably. But the storyline around it is really interesting as well. Just the way that is paced and structured um, gets sort of overlooked in favour of that moment, which I think is unfair but understandable. And I would definitely like to make a video about that, because not only is it a great storyline in the way it's written and in the way it's structured, and in the sense that the audience knows things that the characters don't, in the sense that um, in that first episode where she said she's only got 6 months to live, we know Den is going in there to ask for a divorce, and she doesn't. And by the end of the episode, the tables have completely turned, because we know Angie's lying and Den doesn't. And then it's the same thing on the Orient Express. The tables switch again, and Angie confesses to the barman that she's lying. And we know that Den's heard, but Angie doesn't. So there's a lot of that going on. It's a really well crafted storyline. But in terms of television history, it's sort of the moment that made the soap Christmas. I think I talked about this in my Christmas moments tier list. So a really important moment, and two characters who were hugely famous at the time. I mean, there's a reason we talk about Den and Angie Mania, because it was a mania. I mean, there were two incredibly popular figures in British pop culture at the time, so you can't really not put them at the top of the list, really. Um, so next we've got Ethel, who's little Dot's best friend. It's We're still sort of talking about her, and it's been 22 years since she died. And I think Dot had more life without Ethel than with her on screen, and we're still talking about her. Um, that double act doesn't get nearly enough attention, I don't think. They work really well with one another, because Dot is the sort of serious, anxious, at worst puritanical of the pair, while Ethel is the lively, fun, laid back one. Um, Double acts work best when there's a lot of contrast between the characters, but you also need to understand why they're friends, and you do. In the case of Dot and Ethel, Dot is very protective towards Ethel, and I think vice versa as well. Um, I like I think the best scenes regarding Ethel are when she dies in 2000. Just really beautiful acting by Gretchen Franklin, just begging her friend to end her suffering, and then the repercussions of that, with Dot struggling with the guilt over what she's done and whether she's done the right thing, and she helped her friend but she's also taken her life, and all the all the difficult questions that arise from that. Just a really fun little character who I don't think is really talked about much these days, which is one of the side effects on being a soap, because it runs for so long. It doesn't matter if you're in it for 20 or 30 years, it's going to outpace you, and you'll be left behind, and it'll keep chugging along without you. Um, but yeah, I mean, she stands out to me anyway in soap history. So yeah, she's another solid one. Um, and now we've got Frank Butcher. Now, Frank Butcher is talked about very, very fondly by the fan base, and with good reason. But I think we have to be honest here and say that the interesting thing about Frank Butcher is that he's not a good person. If you write, on paper, he's awful. He's a coward, and he's irresponsible, and he's a cheat, and he's terrible at managing relationships, and he's a bad father, and he's thoughtless, and he's reckless, and he's impulsive, and he abandons Pat to deal with a failing business because he can't hack it anymore, and he runs off. And then he shows up one Christmas and just expects to be brought back into the fold. Um, the when he cheats on Peggy with Pat, which is a great storyline. When it's about to be revealed in the Vic, he's gonna leave. He's gonna leave Pat there to take the blame all by herself. He's gonna go, and he's gonna leave Pat. He's gonna leave Janine there. He was gonna do that anyway when he was running off with Pat. But I think it's because he's such a charismatic and likable character as well. I mean, I often think the thing about Frank Butcher is that Frank Butcher is a man who is terrible at everything except for convincing people that he isn't terrible at everything. Um, that to me makes for such an interesting character because if I think if he was played by anyone else, um, we would probably speak about Frank Butcher as a really unlikable, sleazy guy. Um, but we don't, and it's entirely because of that performance. I mean, he's a complex man in a way, but he also isn't. He's surprisingly simple. He's driven by his own impulses. Um, and I think Mike Reed, as a comedic actor, brings a lot to it as well. He does put upon really well. He looks like a sad old dog sometimes. I think, for my money, the best Frank personally is definitely the Pat and Frank Affair era Frank. Um, I just think that storyline is brilliant, and I definitely want to talk about it because it plays into ideas about what it means to grow older and looking back at your own youth with rose tinted glasses. Um, and Frank Butcher is sort of the perfect character for a story like that because Frank Butcher is a guy who never really wanted to grow up and had no interest in having that responsibility. He finds himself married to Peggy and essentially running a pub and pulling pints, and he hates every second of it because he's had to sort of mature and he's stagnating in life and he's desperate to escape and run back and recapture his youth. That's really what that storyline's about. Um, so for my money, I mean, I'm echoing a lot of sentiments here, but Frank Butcher is right at the top for me. He's not just one of my favourite characters in all of soap. I think he's probably one of my favourite fictional characters. Now, we've got a fairly newer character here that I wanted to talk about. George Knight. It's played by Colin Salmon. Now, I don't watch a lot of modern soaps, really. I tend to watch a lot of the older stuff. A lot of it's available on YouTube, so that's what I dip into. But I heard a lot of talk about George Knight, so I thought I'd look into it. And I thought it was really interesting what they did with this character. It's the thing that really struck out to me was the relationship with his parents, because it's a story about race fundamentally. His parents buy him, and then when his father comes to reclaim him, having changed his mind, he's murdered by George's adopted father. And that process apparently was not uncommon that white families would buy non-white children from their birth parents just because their birth parents were struggling in a country that was kind of pretty hostile to them. Well, not kind of pretty hostile to them, was very hostile to them. And it's interesting to see in EastEnders tackle that. I know it gets a lot of stick for doing social issue storylines, and a lot of them aren't handled well. But this one I thought was really sort of nuanced and interesting, and was not afraid to get dark with it. The idea that his George's adopted parents felt that their desire to have a child trumped the considerations of non-white people, essentially, sort of plays into this idea of racism being the sort of thing that transcends class lines. Like his parents were not particularly wealthy; they were sort of at the bottom of the social hierarchy, but they still had so much edge over black people, um, just in terms of how they viewed their own desires. Um, they didn't think much of that, uh, of buying a person, um, and it's ugly. And they don't. Certainly, his mother doesn't really fully appreciate that. And I'm not explaining it very well, but I credit EastEnders for that. I think this is one of the reasons why I make these videos, because I think soaps do get a lot of stuff really right and do a lot of interesting things, and this is one of them. Um, and people say, there's nothing really great about soaps these days, and certainly I prefer the older stuff, but when you have a storyline like this, it does make you think, no, there's still life in it. There's still life in it. They're still doing stuff that's interesting and different, and not afraid to explore these things. Um, but another thing that really sort of stands out to me about this character is who's playing him. Colin Salmon is not a soap actor, really. I mean, he's been in big films and he's done, quote unquote proper acting. So when he comes to soap, he stands out. You can tell like the choices he's making as a performer. You can tell he approaches the job of acting, the craft of acting, differently than a lot of the people he's working with at the minute. Not to say that they're bad actors, they're not. It's just a different school and a different set of experiences. And I sort of wish soap would do more of that. I want to talk one day about the Soap Stars reality TV show where they cast a family for Emmerdale, and it was all amateur actors, and just how badly that went. And just talking really about acting in soap in general, one of the things I think they should do is cast more actors with a theatrical background or have done more varied work. 'Cause one of the things I think where soap goes wrong is that it casts people when they're young and they spend their entire life in soap playing the same character, and they don't really explore their craft or gain much experience, so they don't really bring anything new to the part. If you've got an actor who's played a whole varied load of roles, you're going to get a much more interesting performance because they've had that experience, so they know their craft more intimately, and it stands out. I see a lot of people talking about Colin Salmon's performance and how it's sort of head and shoulders above a lot of the other people in the soap. And it's always interesting when they bring someone from the outside in. I remember when they brought Ian McKellen into Coronation Street, and that's a jarring contrast as well. Um, so yeah, I would put him there for my money. Now we've got our Hev, lovely Heather. Now Heather sort of became a joke character, but I don't think the joke. It's not like we were laughing at her. I think we were laughing with her. There's an awful lot of affection for Heather Trott in the EastEnders fan community, and I can see why. Just this perennial loser, if I can put it like that. This person who's been dealt a hard hand, but is fun and sweet and kind. Um, and I think, was it a mistake to kill her? I don't know. Maybe. I certainly miss her. I wish she was still in it. I think exploring that character as a mother, exploring that character as a wife would have been interesting. Um, then again, the Ben Mitchell storyline, him killing his oldest friend in a fit of anger, that's sort of interesting too. So I don't really know. All I can say is that I miss Heather. Um, I miss her and Shirley. That double act is great. This contrast between Shirley, who is tough and street smart and assertive, and Heather, who's far more naive and docile, and sort of willing to be walked over a little bit, uh, is great. I mean, I love it when you have a tough character with a really sweet sidekick who they're keen to protect and look out for. I love that dynamic. So Heather, for my money, is another top one. She's sweet and kind and fun as well. I think it's a good comedic performance because it's likable. I think good comedy comes from likable characters in a lot of ways. Well, not all the time, but I think if you have a likable character, it's a different sort of laugh than when you're laughing at a character you don't like failing in a comedic way. I think it's a far warmer viewing experience. I think. So next up, we've got Ian Beale. Now I sort of have mixed feelings towards Ian Beale because my favourite Ian Beale is a pitiful, pathetic, conniving, scheming scumbag Ian Beale. I think that's a lot of people's favourite Ian Beale. I'm not wild about what they did with him later on, um, which was fine for the character, but I like that Adam Woodjet plays snivelling, shit really, really well. And those years where Ian was money grubbing and devious and pathetic are top tier as far as I'm concerned. I One of my favorite episodes, single episodes in all the soap, is where Ian Beale is on the verge of bankruptcy and he needs to get together the money just to save himself. The whole episode is just following around Ian Beale while he tries to scrounge the money to save himself from the abyss and keep the empire that he flatters himself on building. Um, and just all the shitty things he's done coming back to bite him, and Phil joyfully refusing to give him money, and him clashing with the Slaters, and the relationship with Laura where he treats her like complete crap, even though she's oddly devoted to him and his kids. Um, that's another thing. Even the many wives of Ian Beale must have the record for the shortest soap marriage, potentially. Him and Mel. Probably the worst thing he's ever done is pretending like his daughter hasn't got the. He doesn't pretend she has got cancer, that Lucy has got cancer. He just doesn't tell Mel that Lucy's got the all clear. He hangs. I'm sure that's it. He hangs the threat of it over her, so she'll stay with him out of pity. Is that the worst thing any soap character has done? Probably not. It's probably the worst thing Ian Beale has done. But it's scummy in the most enjoyable way. You sort of need a figure like that that's sort of delightfully punchable. Um, and he takes a punch really well, Adam Woodjet, on screen. He does great fake reactions to being hit. That relationship with Phil is great as well because I mean it is bullying, and I mean he assaults him. Phil assaults Ian on numerous occasions, but Ian kind of deserves it. Um, and you have the stuff later on where of course Lucy dies, and that's a real bleak period for the character, and he ends up sobbing in his old rival's arms. Um, but for my money, it's pitiful, pathetic, scheming Ian Beale that's my favourite. So he's not quite top tier, but he's pretty high up as far as I'm concerned. So we've got another couple now. We've got Terry and Irene. Now I don't think people talk about them much these days, but well, there's only very little worth talking about, I think, especially with Irene, because the real storyline that people remember is the affair with the lodger Troy. And I want to talk about this predominantly because it's such a basic storyline, but I think it's dealt with in an intelligent way. Um, because Troy isn't in love with Irene. This is just a casual fling for him. He essentially admits it, and Terry sees right through it. Um, but for Irene, this is another chance of life, and she's far more invested than he is, and that just adds to the tragedy of the whole thing. That this underappreciated woman, who's completely taken for granted by her husband, uh, should should find herself having a toy boy and completely investing herself in the relationship, even though basically everybody who sees it can see it for what it is. Um, and I don't think that extends to the audience though, because I think watching it, I don't think you have visions of them running off together, but you do sort of feel like, in typical soap fashion, this will lead somewhere, that there are genuine feelings, that this won't be so callous as just Troy taking advantage of an older woman. But they went for it, and Troy is called out on it by Terry, and he's made to leave, and they both go to individual rooms and sob on Christmas Day, and it's all downhill from there, really. Because he the trip to Spain that kickstarts Frank and Pat's affair is a brainwave by Terry to sort of repair his relationship with his wife. And Irene is thrilled by this until she finds out that he's also invited Peggy, Frank, Roy, and Pat, which is such a Terry move that even in this circumstance, when he knows how close he came to losing his wife, he still is too thoughtless and messes it up. Um, and she leaves, and then he falls in with Janine in this because his he's Tiffany's dad, which is something that I tend to forget. Um, and there's a weird sort of father-daughter relationship there because Janine has trouble with Frank, and Terry's lost his daughter, and it's this weird relationship. Like I remember Janine deliberately, like I think she dresses up like Tiffany, or she wears her perfume. Um, and Terry, who's grieving her after she died, sort of is finds that appealing, finds that comforting in a way. And it's this weird sort of mutually psychologically tortured relationship where these two people who are struggling with their varying familial issues just sort of use one another to fill the hole. Um, and then he leaves and tries to track down Irene. So two characters who don't really get talked about too much. I think people still talk about Irene's affair with Troy. Um, I remember the actress said that she used to get a lot of letters from people asking if they could be her toy boy, which was a bit much, I think. Um, but for that affair storyline, which, as I say, I think was dealt with really interestingly, I would probably put Irene up there. And Terry, I don't think Terry's not a particularly likable character. You know, he takes his wife for granted completely. He he has the opportunity to repair this relationship, and he fails spectacularly. Um, he's money grubbing, and he's difficult, and he's arrogant, and he's a bit brash. So I'm gonna whack him. Probably there. Truth be told. No, Jamie Mitchell. Jamie Mitchell's an interesting character for me personally because I used to write for a blog, and I one Christmas I was looking for something to do thematically, and my friend who ran the blog suggested I do a soap Christmas set of reviews. And one of the things I wrote about was the death of Jamie Mitchell, and I think that's probably something I'm going to talk about in a video one day. Whether it's about, it'll probably be a wider spanning video about a death in soap in general, or maybe part of another video about maybe Ronnie and Roxy. Um, the thing about it's such a good example to show people when we're talking about deaths in soap because the actor wanted to leave, and you sort of have an issue there, um, because you can either write the character out, which doesn't really make much sense, or you can kill them off. And if you kill them off, you're getting the ripple effect. You're getting months worth of storylines out of that. Whereas if you write them off, you sort of have a challenge because he's never really going to leave Sonia, and it gives you killing him off is easy. If you write him out, you have to resolve a lot of things. You have to explain away things. You know, any idiot can get hit by a car. Um, I think, in terms of the character in general, the real interesting thing about him is his relationships with one with Sonia, um, which was a big thing at the time. I don't really remember it too much, but I know it was culturally it was huge. They were like the golden couple. This cherubic little David Beckham baby-faced kid, and Sonia with her trumpet, um, and just one of those soap couples that was so huge at the time. And I think um, his relationship with Phil as well. That's another big one, uh, which is sort of fatherly and abusive in the same way. It's sort of Jamie is probably much the sort of person that Phil wanted Ben to be. And I think his relationship with Ben suffers more because of that. Ben has to compete with this guy he never knew and who died a long time before he came on the scene in Phil's life. Um, and his relationship with Billy as well was hugely abusive. So he's not a character that really stands out for me, but there are interesting things about him, especially his death and just how textbook of an explanation that is. So I'm going to whack him up here. Now, Cat's sort of completely different because I think Cat is sort of fascinating. Um, I talked about this a bit when we were talking about Charlie Slater. I think Cat is. There's an old trope called the tart with the heart, which is a character who, sleeps around and is sort of vulgar and brash, but under it all has great heart and great trauma that goes along with it. And Cat's sort of the archetypal version of that within soap. Um, there was a list not too long ago, I think, of the 50 greatest soap storylines. It's not a great list. There's a lot of modern stuff on there, which that's just recency bias. But the top moment was the "You Ain't My Mother" scene, which is a moment. It's not a storyline for a start. But I think, like the Den and Angie divorce paper scene, the thing that gets missed about that moment is the stuff around it. Because you introduce Kat as a vulgar, brash. Um, she sleeps around. She's drinking all the time. She's going out. She's very extroverted and lively. Uh, but there's so much pain underneath it all, and it's really well seeded, that relationship between her and Uncle Harry, this man who raped her when she was a child. Um, I think the scene, it's such a great few episodes. The sort of the aftermath of that moment, because she tells Zoe that she's her mum, and Charlie's pissed off at her. Everybody's pissed off at her. Everybody's first concern is Zoe. Nobody really cares about Kat in this moment. And Kat just sits in her room and weeps because, again, she's tossed aside because people's view of her changed when she got pregnant as a kid. Um, and she goes in a bender and she ends up being taken to hospital and almost dying. And one of the interesting things about that scene is, even when she's in hospital, having almost killed herself, and the surgeons are having to try and save her, she's still being objectified. I can't remember what it is that the surgeon or the doctor says, but he makes a remark about her appearance, I think, and calls her darling or something like that. Um, and that's all really interesting stuff that is sort of lost in the wake of that massive moment. So I think there's definitely something to talk about with Cat, because I think that's really interesting, especially how they play it. This character you think is one thing, and then it turns out that the reason why she's like that is because of this real tragedy right at the heart of her life. So I think there's a reason Cat is so popular. So she's right up there for me. Now, I mentioned in the Coronation Street tier video that I thought Fred Elliott was a pretty divisive character, just in terms of people who liked him and people who didn't. It's probably more one-sided than I thought. I think most people prefer Fred Elliott than dislike him. Um, I have a feeling Kim is very different. I think there's a lot of people out there who can't stand her. I think she's the sort of character who could very easily be very, very grating if you're not into that thing. She's such an over the top comedic figure in the soap that it's sort of one of those things where I suspect you probably either love her or hate her. I don't think anybody's really neutral on her. Um, for my money, I think she's great. I think that's right down my street. That real over the top, ridiculous, stupid comedy. I like ridiculous characters. Um, but having said that, she does have serious moments too. More probably than Fred Elliott ever did. For my money, I much prefer her as the comedic character. She has that. I think it's one of those additional little video series that come along with the soap. Her Kimfluencer stuff, again, great. Really like, really like it. Just ridiculous character based stuff. Um, and I think you need a character like that in a soap. You need that degree of levity that comes with a figure that is just silly and fun to watch. You need a joke character, and Kim is a great joke character, so she's up there for me. Now, Max Branning's another really popular character, and I can't say I don't get why, because I think he is very interesting. This man who moved to Albert Square with his family to save his marriage, which is, as Joe Joyner pointed out, is kind of hilarious that the one place you don't move to if you want to save your marriage is Albert Square. Um, he's a guy who just can't help himself. Really, I mean, he's on the square for like 5 minutes and he's already flirting with a mechanic. He cheated on Tanya. Tanya was the other woman originally, to Bradley's mum. Um, it was only a matter of time before he was going to get involved in some sort of affair, and he keeps doing it throughout his time on the show. I watched the Max and Stacey affair when I was a kid. Like that was when I was really into EastEnders. I hated Max. I thought he was an awful, awful person because he is an awful, awful person. He's got next to no impulse control. He's a cheat. He's thoughtless. But it's not like he doesn't feel guilt over what he does, because I think he does. But he enjoys the thrill of it too much to give it up. Um, you can make an argument, a very persuasive argument, that he's responsible for his daughter's death. That he, being on the roof of the Vic is the reason she was on there as well, and the reason she fell off. I I I hated him as a kid, and I remember when Tanya buries him alive. That was a great scene for me. I was very much rooting for the earth in that scene, for the soil itself to sort of get rid of this awful, awful man. Um, and then she dug him up, which sort of ruined it a bit for me. But yeah, I think I'm sort of torn in a way because I don't like Max as a character. Uh, I think he's an awful person, but I think the character is a good character, is an interesting character, and it's a great performance as well. So I'm gonna whack him down at the bottom, but with that caveat, I don't hate him in the same way I hate Blanche, where I don't think Blanche is a particular interesting character. Um, I think Max the character works really well. I just don't like what he is. Now, Mrs. Hewitt, poor lonely Mrs. Hewitt and her Arthur. I think Arthur should have left Pauline for Mrs. Hewitt. To be honest, I think she was a lovely lady, and I think she got a rough hand in life. Frankly, um, I it's one of those weird storylines. People still talk about it just because of how strange it was that Arthur would have an affair. This person who, one, was fairly devoted to his wife, but two, was also too sort of, um, you know, submissive to her and her whims, that he would never ever dare of having an affair or never have the opportunity. Um, so I think a lot of people were probably cheering for Arthur, to be honest. I think I'm a bit biased because I'm more familiar with Pauline because of what came next rather than what she was originally, which I hear was a much stronger character. There probably is something to a video being made about the evolution of that character because I keep hearing it come up again and again and again that Pauline changed radically. And I know she did, but I think I'd need to do more of a deep dive just to research that and see what the potential was for a larger video. Mrs. Hewitt, I think, just a desperately sad character who I don't even necessarily think it was Arthur she was interested in. I think it was just some degree of companionship, and I think Arthur was docile enough and was himself a fairly lonely and wounded character that she sort of latched onto him. These two wounded souls finding each other. I don't think there was anything more to it than that. Um, so I think Mrs. Hewitt, bless her, I think she gets a bad rap, frankly. Now, Nasty Nick's an interesting one because he wasn't originally in the soap until a producer at the BBC insisted that they add somebody particularly villainous. you probably know, EastEnders opens with Reg Cox's body being found, and they didn't intend to resolve that. That was just meant to be an indication that Albert Square is a rough part of town. That's just the sort of place where these things happen from time to time. But the higher ups at the BBC didn't really like the idea that this would never really be solved. They thought it was cheating the audience and people wouldn't like it. So they had to, Julia Smith and Tony Holland had to create an answer to that question. And Nasty Nick is the answer to that question. Now, I know he gets brought up in discussions of soap villains, but I've never really gotten it. Um, Early on, I kind of see the appeal, but to me, he always reminded me of a figure in an old British public information film. You know, I always think of that one about the fireflies, and there's the bad firefly who plays with matches and burns the city down. Um, and that's sort of who Nasty Nick reminds me of. He's the scuzzy guy who's trying to sell kids cigarettes and things like that, and almost like a caricature of himself as the series goes on. He's sort of, it works originally, this whole sort of punk rocker 1980s scuzzy type thing, but as he gets older, it becomes more and more a parody of itself. I think I think I don't mind that they killed him off, because I think a character like that only works for so long, and a person like that only lives for so long. I know John Altman's very fond of the character and has sort of really tried to make as much out of it as possible, but Nasty Nick never really worked that well for me. He was always sort of a panto villain, King Rat style figure, and I don't mind villains who are one dimensional, or even basic, but they have to really go hard for what they're doing if they are one dimensional. I don't think there's enough to Nasty Nick to really win me over. I much prefer villains who are complex and interesting over those who are just sort of, as I say, very much a panto villain. And I know there's the stuff with him not wanting to poison his mother, which is so often remarked on as evidence of him being a complex character. A bit, I guess. Um, I mean, you just have to look at the costume design to see that this is a this is a caricature of a villain. Really, the sort of person who was only added to appease higher ups at the BBC. Um, and I don't mind him massively. He never really did too much for me. So Nasty Nick down towards the bottom. Next we have Nigel Bates. He's sort of inexplicably friends with Phil and Grant. He doesn't seem like the sort of person you would expect to be friends with Phil and Grant. Certainly not these days. It's just another reminder of how different those characters were when they were introduced. Remember in my Sharongate video, looking back on those old episodes in the early 90s, very different pair of characters, very light and fun and playful on occasion. Just sort of, cocky lads, really, combined with the loads of money mentality of the late 80s. Um, and Nigel sort of works in a sense as their friend, because looking back, you can imagine them being friends at school. I think canonically Nigel was being bullied and Phil and Grant stepped in and he sort of latched onto them and they sort of went along with it. Um, a fair third part of that relationship, I guess, but I can see why it wouldn't necessarily work in the long run. I don't think a character like that would. You can only really buy those people being friends for so long. I think they'd naturally drift apart anyway, given the way the Mitchell brothers went in terms of characterization. But Nigel himself is a very likable character. The stuff with Debbie is great. Again, it's the perennial, loser, the underdog, getting the girl, that sort of thing. Very basic trope, which, in order to do it well, relies on the right character and the right actor. And Nigel is a very likable character. There's that moment where he has to he tells her daughter that she's been killed, and it's on the park bench, and it's just all in silence, and it's just this quiet personal moment. Um, it's just a good guy. It's so rare in soaps to have a guy who's, a genuinely decent person. um, and I don't mind so much that Nigel's not in it, but I do kind of wish he'd make a cameo. Be interesting to see him and Phil interact these days. So Nigel, yeah, he's up there well enough for me, to be honest. Nice to see him back. So now I'm gonna do, well, certainly Ronnie and Roxy together. Um, I was thinking about this recently, and it really is kind of staggering just how obviously Ronnie and Roxy are basically Phil and Grant. You've got the brash, outgoing one and the more reserved, intelligent one. They have a difficult relationship with their father, their siblings who are like very, very, very close. It's so it's kind of carbon copy, really, and yet we don't really talk about it because they're such strong characters in and of themselves. I think Ronnie's stronger, but Roxy still has a great screen presence and is likable in and of herself, and that relationship's very strong too, as I say. But yeah, Ronnie's very much the star of that. Just this sort of very damaged, reserved person who you can absolutely see the pain of her life etched on her face. Great storylines too. The whole um, uh, thing with Danielle with her daughter. That's great. That's like a Greek tragedy. That the thing she's wanted so much is so close, and she's the one to push her away. Um, just great drama, great television, and the relationship with Archie as well is brilliant. We'll come on to Archie a bit more in a little while. I think one of the things I would like to make a video on is the death of Ronnie and Roxy, because it is inexplicable to me why they did that, as it is to so many other people. I mean, we're still talking about that being a massive mistake. I mean, they were such big, popular characters with so much to them. Um, it seems insane to throw them away. The thing about soap deaths is you sort of want to weigh up whether this character is worth more alive or dead. And I don't know how you ask that question of Ronnie and Roxy and come out of it thinking that you can get more out of it by killing them. It's a very short term thing. I saw a comment on Reddit recently that suggested that killing one of them might have worked because then you have the reaction of the other to the loss of their sister. Um, I don't know which one you'd kill. It I think it works well either way. I mean, I think Ronnie, I mean, chucking more pain on the pile, really. It might be worth killing off Ronnie to see how it affects Roxy. I think, but it's an interesting point, one I hadn't considered before. It's the sort of thing I'd have to do a lot more research on before I made a video about it. Um, Another thing I might want to talk about is the baby swap storyline, which is probably the most controversial storyline in all of soap. So controversial that they cut it early, where Ronnie again loses a baby and ends up stealing Cat and Alfie's. It got a lot of stick at the time just because of the topic it was focused on. Character wise, it kind of makes sense that Ronnie, having been so much, would crack and do this thing, no longer being able to face it anymore and just sort of completely breaking in the face of life's relentless drive to crush her. Um, so yeah, I mean, two very, very strong characters, complete inexplicable killing them off. You can tell it's inexplicable because Roxy popped back in a dream sequence. I can't imagine there hasn't been a meeting where the question hasn't been asked as to whether they can bring them back. And definitely, I think if they hadn't have killed them off so visually, if we hadn't have seen them both drown with their bodies in the pool, they'd be back by now. Just baffling decision by the powers that be. Um, Now, Archie Mitchell, I see this is again around the time I was really into EastEnders. Archie Mitchell still gets talked about, I think, when it comes to soap villains. But I think he's fascinating in the sense that he's very much of the new way of looking at soap villains. I want to make a video about Richard Hillman and how he changed soap villainy, because before Richard Hillman, soap villains were pretty realistic. There was small scale. There were people like Nasty Nick, who was just your local scumbag, um, or they were wife beaters or whatever. And then after um, Richard Hillman, you get more outlandish villains, and Archie Mitchell kind of is. Maybe him, maybe it's Pat Phelan. I don't know. I think maybe Pat Phelan has it, but Archie Mitchell just commits so many terrible crimes. It's hard to find an atrocity that he wasn't responsible for in some way. What evil thing hasn't that man done? Um, he beats his daughter. He's an abusive husband. He rapes Stacy. He plans to kill Stacy. He assaults Ronnie and causes her a miscarriage. It's just terrible thing after terrible thing after terrible thing. And I really liked that when I was younger. As I get older, I find it a bit less interesting. I went back recently. I watched the Christmas Day episode where he died, and there was a great moment where he's talking to Ronnie about the snow globe that he's obsessed with, and he says that when he was a kid, his father would shake it up and say to him that he had until the snow settled to run and hide, and that if he found him, he was going to beat the hell out of him. And then later in the episode, where Ronnie finds him dead and she and Roxy are talking, Roxy mentions this snow globe, and that when they were kids, Archie would shake it up, and when the snow settled, he said he was going to come and find them and give them presents. Um, which is a really interesting bit of insight into the man. I think I think fundamentally the Mitchell story is the story of abuse trickling down through the generations. Eric and Archie's father was clearly a monster. His father was probably a monster too. By the time you get to Phil, it sort of settles a bit. Um, but I think Archie's very much part of that story, and Ronnie and Roxy are very much part of that story too. They're the outcome of that behaviour. Um, he, he still gets talked about, but I think the older I get, the more interesting things I find about him. One of the little ironies is that Archie sort of wants to present himself as Larry Lamb's character in Gavin and Stacey. That's the man he wants to be, but he never can be it because he's too monstrous and too destructive, and people aren't like that. He can't bend them to his will with absolute certainty. Yeah, it's a great performance. I think he's got these wonderful black eyes, Larry Lamb. Just these dark, soulless, emotionless eyes, which lend itself really well to villainous characters. I don't know whether Archie will get a video in and of himself, but he'll definitely play a part of that Richard Hillman video. I think one of the main issues I have with the character is something a lot of people have mentioned. After he's died, Ronnie says that he was sexually abusing her. You don't really get the impression that that was the plan from the get-go, because it sort of seems like it's more a case of Ronnie is just as strong-willed as he is, and they clash constantly over that, and that he is abusive and that he is controlling. But you never really get the implication necessarily that it's sexual. You can certainly read that in after the fact. I mean, he is very very physical with her when they first have a scene together. But you never really get the impression that it's a sexually abusive relationship, or has been in the past. I think this was probably added after the fact, rather than something that was conceived from the beginning. And I don't know whether you need it or whether it works. I think the reactions to it are interesting, from Roxy and Glenda and Peggy, with Glenda like resenting Ronnie because Archie preferred her, which is interesting, because that happens. That's a reaction that is not altogether uncommon in situations like this. But I sort of wondered whether it might have been interesting to have revealed that Ronnie had lied about that. That she was so fed up with all these people singing Archie's praises now that he's dead that she decided to once and for all get them to shut up about him and pin this terrible, terrible crime on him. Um, that that might have been interesting. I don't think that is the case. I think canonically that happened, but I think it will be interesting, and I, like a lot of people, sort of have issues with that. Um, so Archie, uh, yeah, he's up here for me. He's not quite as interesting enough as a villain to be up here. I think there's you get glimpses of that. He's certainly a complex man. You sort of get the sense that he had a pretty awfully abusive childhood of himself. There's definitely complexity to him. We just don't necessarily see it, and that's a bit of a shame. So now to a character who isn't complex at all. It's just a good man, Roy. Now, Roy sort of plays into the whole Frank Pat affair meaning thing as well. As I said, it's a storyline about youth fundamentally and trying to recapture it. And while Frank is sort of desperate to recapture it, and Pat likes the idea of it, really what she wants is Roy. Because Roy's sort of who she wants to be or should be with at her time of the life in life. It's just a good, stable influence. Whereas Frank represents her youth. So it's this battle between maturity and responsibility and frivolous and nostalgic youth. I think the only person who really would have forced Pat away from Roy is Frank. I don't think anybody else could have done it. Um, and for what it's worth, EastEnders has a good history. I think more than any other soap really of these loser male characters. Um, People who life gives a really bad hand and treats poorly, even though they've done nothing to deserve it. And Roy's very much one of those characters, and I think that storyline, the characters in it are so great and perfect to fit for that type of storyline. Um, because Peggy is not chasing after a youth; she's quite happy being the mature, in control landlady of the Vic, a proper lady, a proper woman. Um, and Frank doesn't want that. Frank wants his youth back, and Pat, as I say, wants her youth back too. And Roy is very much the opposite of that, but it's a struggle between these two desires. It's a clash between what the character wants and what the character needs. Um, so Frank, for his part in that storyline, I'd probably put him right about here, to be honest. So now we have another villainous character, Stella Crawford. Um, what's interesting to me about Stella is that people don't really talk about her. She doesn't really pop up in much discussions about soap villains for a start, and which is even stranger given her proximity to the Mitchell family. You'd expect her to be one of those figures who comes up constantly in conversation. What with her being a wife of Phil Mitchell and abusing, Ben Mitchell, who's now a major character in his own right, but she doesn't really get spoken about. Um, I like soap villains in general. I remember watching the Stella storyline when I was younger. I absolutely loathed her. I thought it was a really great storyline. I think one of the noteworthy things is that it sort of dips a bit into horror territory. There's an episode where Phil goes to see Stella's parents, and it's implied very strongly that her sister died under mysterious circumstances and that Stella was responsible. I sort of wish we got more of that. Um, there might be something in that video wise. I might look into why people don't talk about Stella quite so much. Um, there's something there, I think, in the character, and I don't understand why she doesn't come up in conversation more. Um, so Stella, another good solid character. I think more worthy of discussion than really we give her credit for. Um, so next we've got Saeed, the second half of the Saeed Christian storyline. Uh, I compare Saeed a lot with Todd from Coronation Street because it's essentially the same storyline of two people in difficult social situations coming to terms with their own sexuality. I think it's a better played storyline with Todd, just because of the circumstances. For a start, he's a kid. He's a teenager. He's still learning a lot about himself, and it's easier to feel sympathy for him. Saeed's a grown man, and I don't mean to diminish the difficulty that anybody has growing up in an extremely religious background, but it's sort of harder for me to feel too much sympathy for someone who keeps making such terrible, terrible decisions as an adult. Um, he decides to stay with his wife and make it work, even though that is absolutely going to cause more trouble in the long term. And while it makes sense that his family feels that way, because not only are they conservative Muslims, they're conservative Muslims whose business is a catering business, which does a lot of business within the conservative Muslim community, which means that there's a lot of money to be lost on this. It's not just a family's religious beliefs. There's a financial element to it too. Um, I sort of had a hard time feeling a great deal of sympathy for Saeed. I found him weak, honestly. And again, I don't mean to diminish anybody's in that situation because it is a difficult situation. But at the same time, I feel like it annoyed me that he wasn't proactive in taking a degree of responsibility and sorting stuff out. Um, Not the only problem I have with that storyline. I think it would have been nice to see more liberal Muslim representation rather than just the conservative branch. It would have been nice if you could have had a discussion with a liberal, preacher or priest, Iram, about the situation. I don't think that really happened until after he'd left. I can't remember whether he stopped going to temple or whether he found somewhere else. I don't know. Um, I It doesn't help that the Todd storyline does it so much better. It's difficult for me to find the character likable when he makes so many terrible decisions. That just he is responsible for the mess he is in, and it's sort of understandable in a way, but I don't think it works quite as well as conceived. So I'm sorry, I've got to put him fairly low. And last on the list is everybody's favourite silent barmaid, Tracy. Um, I I really love the idea of an extra who sort of takes on a new life because of the fandom. And I remember when I was watching the Who Killed Archie storyline. My money was on Tracy. Like genuinely, as a kid, I thought Tracy was a good contender. I like the idea of her being like this silent guardian of the Mitchells, who saw what Archie did to them, and decided to take vengeance into her own hands. I I think a character like that is really interesting because it's the sort of the fans have made Tracy what she is. She could easily just be just an extra who repeat work, just stick her in the background of a scene, but she's absolutely taken on a life of her own. And no other soap, I think, has a character like that. Because she's not a main character. She just pops up every now and then and maybe has a few lines if she's lucky. And I think it would be really stupid of EastEnders to give her too much to do. Mercifully, they haven't. I hope they keep striking that balance. I don't want to see Tracy get a storyline, a major storyline. Just give her a couple of lines every now and then. See her pop up in the background of scenes. That's all we need, really. Um, so Tracy, another good, solid character. So, yeah. Um, so yes, I think a decent spread of characters there. I might um, revisit the soap character idea in a little while. Quite like to branch out and do something a little different with the tier lists every time because I understand these aren't what you're here for really. This is just something to tide you over in the meantime. Um, but yeah, I just want to say again, thank you for all the support. It really is great that this stupid little channel that I thought of, a couple of years ago has sort of taken on a little life, and I've got people who enjoy my stuff, which is amazing and brilliant, and I want to keep doing it. So yeah, I'll get cracking on the main video, and hopefully that'll be out in a few weeks or so. So yes, thank you very much. Bye.